Okay. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is Miss Humbert here, and now we're going to be doing Unit 5, Learning Target 5. So today we're going to be using that zero product property, but now we're going to also apply it to factoring. So let's go ahead and let's just remind ourselves a little bit about the zero product property and how it works. So remember, when you're doing the zero product property, all you have to do is take each parenthesis and set it equal to 0. So x plus 5 is equal to 0, and likewise x minus 9 is equal to 0. Okay, so for this one, to get x by itself, we're going to subtract 5 from both sides, so we get that x is equal to negative 5. For this one, we're going to add 9 to both sides, and then we get that x is equal to 9. So the answer for number 1 is that x is equal to negative 5 and x is equal to 9. So that's your answer for number 1. Next, let's take a look at number 2. So for number 2 is the same thing. You're going to have to take each factor and set it equal to 0. Okay, so we're going to do 2x plus 4 is equal to 0. And 5x minus 9 is equal to 0. So now we want to go ahead and solve each of these for x. So here we're going to subtract 4 from both sides. And then we get 2x is equal to a negative 4. Then divide both sides by 2, and you get x is equal to a negative 2. Then we want to add 9 to both sides for this guy here. And then we get 5x is equal to 9. Divide both sides by 5, and we get that x is equal to 9/5. You can leave that as a fraction if you want to divide it out to see what the decimal is. You can do that as well. But these right here are your answers. So let's continue on. So if you have something a standard form quadratic, so we had ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, normally to solve it, we would have to graph. That's what we were looking at, those x-intercepts on the previous note sheets. Except this time, now to solve it, we're going to use the zero product property, which in order for us to use the zero product property, we're going to have to factor. So that's going to use skills from last unit. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that's going to look like. So remember, when we factor, we need to set up that x. So factoring is really important this unit. So we're going to take the coefficient of this term, which is going to be 1, times that. So 1 times 5 is 5. So we're multiplying to 5 and adding to 6. Well, what's going to do that? 5 and 1. So now we need to factor. So we're going to take x squared. Now, instead of writing 6x, we're going to write it as 5x plus 1x plus 5 is equal to 0. And now we're ready to factor. Okay, so now I want to make my groups. So I'm going to make my two groups. Between x squared and 5x, I can take out an x. So I'm dividing each of these terms by x, and then I'm left with x plus 5. Out of my second group, I can take out a 1. So I'm going to divide each term by 1. So basically, that's not like taking a GCF out at all. And then I'm left with x plus 5. And that's going to be equal to 0. I'm just keeping that there as a reminder for myself. So my leftovers are matching, so I can factor those out. And then I'm going to write what's left after that once I've taken those out, which is x plus 1. So now I'm ready, and I can take each of those factors and set them equal to 0. So x plus 5, well, that's going to be set equal to 0. X plus 1, well, that's going to be set equal to 0. So now we need to solve each of those for x. So for this one, I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides, and I get x is equal to negative 5. For this one, subtract 1 from both sides, and I get that x is equal to negative 1. So my solution for number 3 is that x is equal to negative 5 and x is equal to negative 1. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move on to that next one. So if you kind of get the process, feel free to finish the note sheet on your own. But ultimately, remember, you need to have a completed note sheet. Okay, so next, let's take a look at number 4. So for number 4, first thing we want to do is set up the x. So we're multiplying to a negative 21 and adding to 4. So positive and a negative product. So I'm going to use positive 7 and negative 3. So now I'm going to use those ideas to split up that middle term. So instead of writing 4x, I'm having 7x minus 3x minus 21. And remember, now that's set equal to 0. I can't do any solving with the 0 until I've factored. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to factor, so I'm going to make my two groups. Between x squared and 7x, I can divide out an x. So I'm dividing each term by x, which is x plus 7. Then, because the term on the inside is negative, I need to take out a negative GCF. So between negative 3 and negative 21, I can take out a negative 3. And that leaves me with x plus 7. Again, equal to 0. So my leftovers here are matching, so I can factor those out. And once I factor those out, in the other parenthesis, I'm going to write what's left over, which is x plus 3. So now I need to take and I need to set each of those factors equal to 0. So I'm going to get that x plus 7 is equal to 0 and x plus 3 is equal to 0. So I'm going to solve each of these for x. So I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides, and I get that x is equal to negative 7. Here, subtract 3 from both sides, and I get that x is equal to negative 3. So those are my two answers for number 4. X is equal to negative 7, and x is equal to 3. Negative 3, sorry. Let's take a look at number 5. So again, I'm going to set up my x. So I'm multiplying to 10, adding to negative 7. So that's going to be a negative 5 and a negative 2. So now I'm ready to factor. So I'm going to split up, and instead of writing 7x, I'm going to write negative 5x minus 2x. And that's going to be set equal to 0. So now I'm ready to factor by grouping. So I'm going to make my two groups. Between x squared and 5x, I can take out an x. So again, I'm dividing each of these terms by x, and then I'm left with x minus 5 in my first group. Now I notice that in the middle there I have a negative sign, so that means I need to take out a negative greatest common factor. So between 2 and 10 I can take out a negative 2, and then I'm left with x minus 5. Again, setting that equal to 0. So I see here that my leftovers are matching, so I'm going to go ahead and factor those guys out. And then after I've factored those guys out, I'm going to write what's left over. Now, this is set equal to 0, so once I have it factored, I can go ahead and use that 0 product property. So I'm going to take x minus 5 and set it equal to 0, and x minus 2 and set it equal to 0. So to solve for x here, I'm going to add 5 to both sides, and then I get that x is equal to 5. Here, I'm going to go ahead and add 2 to both sides, and that's going to give me x is equal to 2. So for our final answer for number 5, we have x is equal to 5 and x is equal to 2. Alright, so now we're ready to take a look at number 6. So let's go ahead and get our x all set up for number 6. So for number 6, remember when you're setting up the x, you need to multiply the first and the last term. So 2 times 3 is 6. So you're multiplying to 6 and adding to 7. So to multiply to 6 and add to 7, well, we need to use 6 and 1. So again, I keep that first term the same. Now I'm going to split up that middle term. Instead of having 7x, I'm going to write that as 6x plus 1x plus 3 is equal to 0. So now I'm ready to factor by grouping. So here I'm going to make my groups. So I'm going to group here and here. Between 2 and 6, I can take out a 2, and I can also take an x out of each term. So I'm dividing each of these by 2x. Well, 2 over 2 cancels out. X squared over x leaves me with x. 6 divided by 2 is 3, and x over x cancels. Now, between 1x and 3, I can't take anything out, so I'm just going to take out a 1 as a placeholder, and then I'm left with x plus 3. And I'm setting that equal to 0. So now I notice that my leftovers are matching. Okay, now that I know that they're matching, I can factor those out. And once I factor those out, I'm going to write what's left over, which is 2x plus 1. And so now I can factor using the zero. Now that I factored, I can use that zero product property. So I'm going to take each factor and set it equal to 0. So x plus 3 is equal to 0, and 2x plus 1 is equal to 0. So here, subtract 3 from both sides, and I get x is equal to negative 3. Here, I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. Then I get 2x is equal to negative 1. I'm just going to give it a second to get all caught up here. The computer is kind of lagging a little bit, isn't it? So now, in order to get the x by itself, I'm going to have to divide both sides by 2, since that 2 is being multiplied by the x. So then I get x is equal to a negative 1/2, and x is equal to a negative 3 as my final answer. Again, you can write negative 1/2 as a decimal if you want. All right, let's take a look at number 7. So for number 7, we're going to get our x set up to start off with. So when we set up our x, we're going to take 3 times 5, which is 15. So we're multiplying to 15 and adding to 16. So to do that, we need to use 15 and 1. So now I'm going to rewrite this out. I'm going to keep my first term the same as 3x squared. And then I'm going to split up 16x. Instead of writing 16x, I'm going to write 15x plus 1x. Plus 5 is equal to 0. So now I'm ready to factor by grouping. So I'm going to make my two groups. Between 3 and 15, I can divide out of 3 and an x. So I'm taking and dividing each term by 3x. Well, 3 over 3 cancels out. X squared divided by x is just x. 15 divided by 3 is going to give me 5, and x over x is going to cancel. Out of my second group, there is no GCF, so I'm just going to take out a placeholder of 1. So then x plus 5. So I notice here that my leftovers are matching. So I can go ahead and factor out my leftovers. Now once I've gotten rid of those, I'm going to write what's left after that, which is 3x plus 1. And we're setting that equal to 0. Well, now that I have two factors being multiplied together set equal to 0, I can take and I can set each factor equal to 0. So from the first term, x plus 5 is equal to 0. I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides, and I get that x is equal to a negative 5. Here, to solve the second equation, the first thing I'm going to do is subtract 1 from both sides, and I get 3x is equal to a negative 1. Now that 3 is being multiplied by the x, so to get it to the other side, I'm going to divide both sides by 3, and I get that x is equal to a negative 1/3, or a negative 0.33 if you want to do a decimal. So those right there represent both of my answers for number 7. Most of the time you're going to have two answers. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get this last one set up for you, and then I want you to try it on your own. If you still don't feel like you quite understand it after the video, why don't you go ahead and bring it up so we can talk over it a little bit together. Okay, so let's take a look at number 8. So for number 8, we're going to set up our x. So we're multiplying to 7 and adding to 8. Well, that's going to be 7 and 1. So now I'm going to rewrite this out. I'm going to split up my middle term as 7x and 1x plus 7. Now this should technically be set as equal to 0 if we're going to use that zero product property. So that was a typo, so maybe on your paper write equal to 0. So what I want you guys to do is I want you to finish factoring this and then solve it using the zero product property. Once you're done, show me your completed note sheet. Thanks for listening.